Yeah? Awesome. All right. So let me go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint for you guys. Good old technology. All right. So let me go ahead and go full screen. My name is Hannah Skoonberg, and I'm currently teaching at the Santa Rosa Junior College in California. The SRJC is a surprisingly excellent two-year college in Northern California with a very, very good printmaking program. This is a print. This is kind of the print that made it click for me. Okay, so I did this piece in 2000 and, well, gosh, I can't even think of the year. I'm gonna set a timer so I don't run out of time here. All right, there we go. So this is a piece I did. This is one of those prints where you kind of understand relief carving in a different way. I was thinking about how to describe the forest and how to describe something that is sort of moving in and out of focus in a forest scene. And in carving, it can be very difficult to try to translate something that is subtle and textured in lines that are just black and white. And to me, that's a very, very interesting challenge. And so something I like about this piece that I was able to do, and it was really exciting, is there are areas here that are carved as white lines on black, and areas that feel like black lines on white, and areas that kind of shift between those. And I felt like here I had this feeling of unlocking the language of relief. And you can understand that conceptually, but like as soon as you start doing it yourself, then you have this feeling of it kind of clicking and making sense in a different way. And I wanted to kind of push myself to carve, like, what can I carve, you know? So coming off of this piece, I carved this print. This is a piece based on a photograph I took in the Appalachian Mountains. This is basically we're driving along the Blue Ridge Trail and the sun was setting and it was snowy, it was winter. We pulled over, I had to take a picture of this tree. It had such an unusual shape. And I carved it. I carved it like this. It's about 3 feet tall by 2 feet, so it's quite large. And it took forever. It took forever to carve this. And I think it was kind of like a test for myself to be like, can I carve this? Can I realistically carve as if it was a photograph? And it's funny because I'll tell people this is a relief print, a lino cut, and people won't believe me. They're like, no. And so I left in the upper corner. If you look at the upper corner there, you'll see a little bit of that chatter, that little indicative relief printmaking chatter, just to show, just a little hint that it is actually a relief print, to show a little bit of the artist's hand. Later, I had a conversation with an artist, and he told me something that stuck with me for years. And he said to me, well, Hannah, if you're going to carve something so photographically that it might as well just be the photograph, why not just put the photograph in a frame? And at the time, I did not have a good answer to that question. I think I had to stew on that one for years. But in my next piece, I tried to think about that question of like, what does it mean to carve something photographically? And so this is a print that I worked on later. And I'm sorry for the slightly blurry focus. I wanted you guys to see a close-up shot of some of these details. And so in this print, I'm trying to carve the air. So instead of carving the branches, because when you carve, you don't actually carve the branches, right? You're carving around the branches. You're carving everything but the branches. And so what you really are carving is you're carving the air. And so in this print, I wanted to draw the air moving around the branches, and not to use outline, but just to let the carve end at those points, to let the tool pick up. And there were these funny little nuts left in these trees. And so I kind of like wanted to get a little bit of that like little textured up there. This is again 3 feet by 2 feet. So what I thought was really interesting is that at a distance, these lines really read as a value. But then when you look at up close, you have all of this line work, all of this sort of interesting movement. And I really wanted it to feel like air. And this is an idea I come back to later. So sometimes you'll have an idea and then years later you'll be like, and think about it again. But one thing I noticed when I was working with this image is how the branches kind of arc together. I was looking at, and I responded to this sort of like this shape of the arc, the roof, the arch. And so I wanted to think about that in terms of like a home or shelter. And so I took that idea and I started doing some different pieces. So this is the exact same image, right? So it's the same photograph, but made into a cyanotype with this shape that reflects the shape of those branches. This image is actually pulled from a collection of little Buddhist amulets that I collected. And so I have this like funny little collection, and they're all like little shaped houses that the Buddha could sit in. And I thought that was just really responded to that shape and that silhouette and that feeling of home. And I wanted, I was like, well, what can I do to like make a home? And I wanted to make a home, but I wanted to make a home in the environment, right? Like being home in your environment. And so I think it's interesting to follow an idea and sort of trace an idea towards a more finished piece, because an idea doesn't just sort of blast into your head fully formed. It kind of goes through these permutations. So I was like, well, what is a house made out of? Houses are made out of bricks, little blocks. And so I decided to make these little cut paper blocks. So this is basically, I wanted to make a house of grass, kind of like little pigs, like the 3 little pigs, house of straw. I like the idea of something that was there and not there, something that was solid and not solid, something that was permeable, something that looked like shelter but wasn't quite shelter. I like the idea of like a house projected on a landscape, the feeling of landscape being a home in your landscape, right? I'm sort of like saying the same thing a couple different ways, but this was very important to me. And part of this was, I was like young adult, I was finding my own way, and figuring out what a home meant to me was very important at this time. So the way I did this is I drew out this design on an actual cube and then unfolded it, and then used this as the template to cut the paper cubes. Unfortunately, it turns out the little paper cubes did not stack super well. So making them into a little cube pile was not the most successful piece. Weird, yes, but a little odd. So later on, I ended up translating this idea into something that was a little bit more sturdy, right? So I wanted to make a house of grass. And so this is the first brick and only brick that ever came to be in my house of grass. These are inland sea oats made into an actual cinder block dimensions. My friends are like, what are you doing? This does not make sense. But I wanted this idea of this sort of transparent structure, and how could I make that happen? This one has a little armature underneath it. These are inland sea oats. If I could have had like an army of assistants, I probably could have made at least a small wall out of paper bricks. That would have been fun. So thinking about, again, what is this house? What does it mean to like be in a place and to feel like being in a place? So coming off of that, I started to translate this idea in more into the flat medium. So this is a cyanotype glued to a set of window blinds. So I was making cyanotypes. This is a window of my old studio. And I was basically cutting cyanotype paper. I made a photograph and I was cutting the cyanotype paper into strips. I had to actually do a little bit of a funny little registration thing to get the to not compress the image because the window blinds have a slight overlap. It was interesting. But I thought what was really funny about this, I thought it was funny, is that the view, I could have done any view, right? The view, the photograph in the window is the exact view of the landscape from the window. And so kind of the humor here is you could have had any place, any sort of beautiful escape, Paris, but no. You close the blinds and it is just more reality, just like layered on top. And so this was kind of a funny piece. And the sort of surprising part of it was, even though this is just a black and white image of the view from the window, it still felt kind of magical because of the way the light came through the window, right? And so you can actually see how the window is sort of glowing as the light comes through it. And you know, the problem is I couldn't take this piece with me. It doesn't make sense anywhere else. It's funny here in this window, but that's where it lives now. I believe this building has been demolished, so sad face, it's fine. It belonged to the building. Here's an image of me installing that with a little bit of help. So you can see I'm sort of gluing them in C2. My studio smelled like glue for a month. But there you go. But then it had this soft blue light. But I like this idea enough that I wanted to visit it again in a way that I could show it. And so I ended up making a different version of this idea than this piece. And hilariously, it's right here. You can see it behind me. So this is the start of a piece series that explores this idea of this quarry. So I was really interested in this quarry in Knoxville, Tennessee, called the Imes Quarry. So Tennessee is known for marble quarrying. And this specific place, they turned it into like a nature trail. And it's very surprising to be hiking through the forest and to find these sort of unexpected artifacts of quarrying, right? So you can find like this wall with these weird little like curved niches again, you know, it's like attraction to this shapes, that like arch, right? But they didn't cut through this little wall. They just sort of like little niches. I was just mystified by them. I was like, what is going on here? And I'm like, it's like in the forest. And so this place, I was just really curious about it. And it was apparently where they would store the dynamite for the quarrying. They would store them in the niches to keep it dry. But as you're like walking through this quarry, there's like boulders, square boulders, just, you know, in the forest with moss growing on it. And so it just feels like giants were here and like left years and years ago. Here's this piece again installed. What's interesting about this is it's actually like a set of blinds. So you can pull the little cords and open and close the blinds, which is kind of interesting and fun, like a little odd way to work, right? So we think about art being flat, you know, it doesn't have to be. This is another piece exploring that idea of the quarry, thinking about reflections. So this is where I was starting to play with some ideas of sandblasting. So these are the right-hand side is a woodcut, the left-hand side is a cyanotype. And I've made it into a reflection. On the right-hand side, I actually did screen print emulsion on the block as a way to protect the block from sandblasting, and blasted the block to a couple different, like the grain opens as you sandblast it, and then carving as well. So just kind of like finding that place like that you are responding to. And I kept going back to it. It almost felt like a pilgrimage to this one place. And so these following pieces kind of respond to that. Here's another piece with the sandblasting. So this is a wood block printed, but the image, instead of it being carved, is blasted using the sandblaster into it. And this is deeper into the quarry. These are these giant marble stones, and they have this kind of feeling of like monolithic tomb-like feeling. This was really interesting to me at the time. So keep going here. This is a piece I did. So I'm still thinking of coming back to this idea of the house and like, what is it in a house? What am I responding to? The grass house. And so this is a piece that's a cut paper chair, 2 chairs, right? So I had 2 rocking chairs. One of them was kind of falling apart. One of them was a little bit more intact. If you visited my studio, you may have sat in one of these chairs. But what I did is I ended up tracing out and copying the pattern of the caning for the seat in the back and printing an image of grasses and then cutting it. And so there's this feeling of time, of like the materiality of the caning, and also this idea of 2 people in conversation. So I would hang these pieces next to each other. And I love the idea that one is more like worn, kind of falling apart, falling on hard times. One is more aged. And so there's this feeling of 2 individuals sitting in this chair as having a conversation. Now, the other thing was, so these objects of the home, right? Kind of thinking about what these objects of the home are and how I can kind of like think and translate those ideas into print. And not in a functional way. So like, these are not chairs you could sit in. They're not, especially not the one on the right, you know? So then I started to think about like the quilt. So the quilt is that other object and of the home, thinking about being in the home. But I think there's something very poetic and beautiful about a paper quilt, right? Making a quilt using actual quilting technique to make a quilt that's out of paper, a quilt that cannot keep you warm, a quilt that you that's an idea of warmth and the denial of warmth. And to me, this is where the series starts to play with ideas of grief. And like, what is it? What is the thing that cannot keep you warm, right? And so for me, this series ended up being about loss and about kind of processing feelings of grief. I decided to end up making, this was a sort of small version of this idea. And then I moved from this to making a much larger version of the quilt. So this is a queen size quilt with 36 tiles with different cyanotype exposures. I included a picture of me there so you can see how big it is, right? It was actually quite large. And in its initial installation, it's just hung with clips so that it kind of, the paper kind of flutters a little bit as you walk by it, giving it that really, that feeling of paper, that feeling of lightness. The image, again, is actually a photograph from this quarry. So the quarry is continuing to be a part of my work, even when it's not obvious. So with this piece, you'll notice that there's a single photograph overlaid over the entire quilt. There are these like butterfly weeds. And in order to get the image of the quilt, I actually had different exposure times. So I made the tiles as blanks and then made a little sort of rubylith stencil that I removed partway through the exposure process to get 2 different exposure times for the cyanotypes. Again, things that don't function, right? And like the lack of function being kind of like part of the humor and part of like the tragedy here. So this is a chain link fence that is made out of paper. So it's like it's sagging, it's very fragile. I actually got 2 fence rods on either side, right? So the side pieces are held up by like metal that's been spray painted white and sort of looped onto it. And so this is just, again, coming back to those ideas of cut paper, right? These can keep emerging in your work. You walk away and you come back. Because like they're just sort of in the tar pits, bubbling up and bubbling back down. And so this is a little chain link fence. And the way you do it is you cut a zigzag and you link them and you do a little dab of glue at each joint. That's how you make a paper fence, kids. Next time you're trying to make one. So this is a piece that's part of that same series, thinking about that idea of grief and loss. And so this is a floor piece. It's sitting on the floor. It's based on a Turkish prayer rug. So there's a number of prayer rugs. If you're familiar with prayer rugs, often they'll have a sort of up. There's often a sort of temple shape on the prayer rug so that you can orient yourself properly when you are praying. There's these interesting series of Turkish prayer rugs, though, that have slightly more humanistic outlines in them, which I thought was really fascinating. And so in this piece, I copied, or I pulled from reference material from one of these beautiful prayer rugs, and I made a cut stencil for it. And then through that stencil, I applied ash. So this dust you're seeing is actually fireplace ash, misdusted through the cut of the stencil. It's interesting because this fireplace ash was kind of brown. And when I was like, I had the idea and I was like, oh yeah, ash would be gray. And it was really much more of like a brown color. So depending on what wood you're burning in your fireplace, you'll get different fireplace ash. Didn't know that. But I really, what I really liked about this piece was how ephemeral it was and how impossible it was. So for me, this piece was about wanting to ask for something impossible. Because in order to use a prayer rug, you have to sit on it, you have to kneel on it. And in order to use a prayer rug made of ash, it will be destroyed by you trying to use it. And so I really like the metaphor of like a wish or a prayer that you can't make, that you can't ask for, because to ask for the thing would destroy the thing. Okay. And so this is kind of an emotional piece. And then you can see I start to use a motif around the figure of blackberries. You can see a little bit of close up. So that image emerges later in the work as well. But unfortunately, this piece doesn't exist anymore because it was made out of ash. So all you get is a photo now. Ash and a lot of spray adhesive. If any of you want to do some stencil work on the floor pieces, that's the secret. Lots and lots of spray adhesive mixed with ash. You'll be in good stead. So thinking about that feeling of pain, that feeling of grief, and like translating that. This is a piece that I did that's about that feeling. Okay, so this is you might recognize it, some of you, as a skirt pattern. So if you ever do any sewing, or you might be familiar with how a circle skirt is made. This one in particular has buttons that would go up the front, and that's why it's sort of split down the front. And this one had pockets because all skirts worth their weight should have pockets. So that's what those funny little ear shapes are on the skirt. And so it's meant to be hung like this in pieces on the wall flat. And it's printed in pieces on this Japanese paper that almost kind of even feels like a paper pattern material. And the idea for this one, because your waist would go through that center hole. Like if you constructed the skirt, your waist would be like right in the middle there. And then the thistles, and that's what these are. These thistles would visually brush up against your legs, right? And so the idea for this piece is thinking about walking through pain and wearing pain and walking through that bramble. It's also a halo. So when you stand next to it on the wall and you look away from it, it like you become the center of the crown of thorns, right? Like if you stand in front of it, it's a crown of thorns. If you wear it, it's a skirt. And so this is a screen print on my favorite Japanese kitakata paper. So that's what that piece is about. This is again that idea. So this is a lino cut. I forgot I'm not mentioning the sizes here. This is about 38 inches by 38 inches. This is blackberries. So you can see the little fruits. And I tried to print it in a kind of blackberry purple. I was making these two pieces, this one and the skirt, and I had them in my studio, and I was feeling a little bit like uncertain about them. Because there's a thing about this work that is kind of inherently feminine, right? Making work about making dresses and clothing, and there's a quality to it that's very feminine. And I was being a little bit critical about it. And I had a wonderful conversation with an artist, Andrew Raftery. He teaches at SCAD, great printmaker, love him. And he was saying to me, I was like, I don't know, Andrew, it feels kind of decorative. And Andrew Raftery was like, what's wrong with decorative? And I had to stop for a second. I was like, what is wrong with decorative? Was it because it's been coded feminine? Was it because I'm making work that feels kind of gendered? And I had to sit with that, you know, because in some ways the work it's about surface and like the textures of a home and the textures of feelings but it's also more than that. I love the idea of blackberries because they're about temptation. You see them, you want them, but like getting to them is always extremely challenging. And the best one is always just deeper in the bush. And so you're just like getting stabbed up going for it. I don't know about you, but like I'm kind of intense about picking blackberries. That's what I grew up doing in Georgia. And I would get to those blackberries, right? And so for me, this is about the opening in this print is about an invitation. Like you want to reach your hand into it. You want to reach those blackberries, but it's also a promise of pain, right? Like those blackberries. And I intentionally tried to carve it to look as prickly as possible. And if you look at the print, you can really see how thorny it is. That was kind of important to me at the time. Okay. So moving on from this, we've got 20 more minutes. We're doing okay. This is a little bit of a different page here. This is kind of a one-off, but I really thought it was fun to try. I've been really interested in the work of Christiane Baumgartner. And she is an amazing artist who does these fabulous like World War II planes. And she carves things as if they look like they were in a security camera. And she does these images of planes and images of roads, highways. And I had this feeling of unease from them. And I was like, why do I feel so uncomfortable with these like images that are just stills of security camera footage? And it's like, well, you only look at security camera footage right before something terrible happens. And so there's a quality of like potential. I also wanted to know if I could carve something just getting thicker and thinner lines, you know, like part of this was like a technical exercise. And so what I did here, this is from an exchange portfolio I did with some friends. This is why exchange portfolios are good. They get you out of your funk. You try something totally different. So my friends put together an exchange portfolio called "You Have Died of Dysentery, the Oregon Trail," based on the hit 90s video game, computer game. And so I was thinking about like the Oregon Trail being a real thing. And this is Arches National Park. So based on an image of Arches National Park. And I wanted to just have the lines get thicker and thinner. So you can see here that there's like a little boulder here at the bottom, and the boulder is, the lines just get thicker and thinner, or they'll get like wigglier, right? So depending on how textured an area was, I would kind of wiggle the tool differently. This is that process. You can see here, here's the linoleum block on the table. You can see I've kind of gridded it out as I think about carving it. And you can see on the left here, the actual like view of arches that I was kind of referencing in this carving process. This is another print thinking about kind of things that you collect, things that you hold. I don't know if any of you would do this, but like arranging little objects and interacting with the sort of the forest floor. So this is kind of the start of a series that I've been working on. It's all about the forest floor and like looking down, right? Like not about landscape as vista, but landscape as texture and little objects you picked up off the ground. This is a little linoleum cut of pine needles. Cool hack, the pine needle pile is actually printed twice, rotated 180 degrees. So in order to get a more pine needle impression, I just printed it twice, once upside down, and that's how I got extra pine needles in the pine needle pile. So it's about sorting. So I was thinking about grasses and landscape, and kind of landscapes that aren't landscapes. So landscape is a very, very traditional format, right? Landscape is all about giving you the illusion that you're stepping into a space. And I'm curious about landscapes that don't do that, right? Landscapes where they kind of stop you, they confront you. And so one way to do that is these landscapes where the texture is almost like a visual barrier. So this is a piece that I carved that's really just about the grasses. What's interesting is that you can see roughly, you can see almost a bit of a tree here. It's getting lost again in that texture. You can see a bit of a horizon, but you're not really able to access the horizon. But it's really all about this like pattern and texture and that kind of surprise. This print is, each panel is I think 18 inches wide, 18 by, so then it's like 54 inches wide. I'm just guessing, I think that's not right. So it's quite big. I hung it, for something like this, I think hang it in 3 little frames was the way to do it. Although here you can see how the image abuts itself. So I'm still thinking about that texture, but I'm also thinking about what happens when you carve something more photographically or less photographically. And around this time, I met a very dear friend of mine. Her name is Jen Basile. She's a fabulous lino cut artist in Miami. You guys should totally check out her work. She's amazing. Basile, Basile. And she sketches on her block using these really fat paint pen markers. And if you want like a quick way to make your drawings more loose, like if you're getting too tight with your drawing and you're like, how am I going to loosen up? Give yourself like an impossible tool. Like if you give yourself a marker that is too big to draw with, you're going to have a different time with it. And so what Jen would do is she would just sketch on her blocks using these like kind of like 2-inch paint markers and then carve it exactly as it had been drawn. So there's this wonderful quality between the quickness of the drawing and the meticulousness of the mark, carved line, capturing the looseness of the drawing, right? And it reminds me of the Japanese woodblock printing tradition. Well, you'll see, if you don't know anything about this, they would make a sumi ink painting for the original key block. And then they'd adhere that down to the first block and basically carve through the paper to make that image. So you'll see things in Japanese woodblock printing that looks like a brush stroke. And it's because the original sketch was a brush stroke and they're carving it to look like a brush stroke. And I think that's really fun. So this is a print. This is based on a view, sort of an impenetrable fog. I was trying to drive home somewhere and the fog was so thick, I had to pull off the freeway and like just park for a little while until the fog could clear. And this is a bit of sort of brambly jungle behind a gas station. I was just like, wow, this is so spooky. And I basically carved the block in 3 different blocks. So I have a brown block, a brown block, a black block, and a gray block, and then a gradient flat layer kind of layered on top of each other. So still thinking about this like expressive mark making, really wanting to think about something that could be kind of energetic and carve with that energy. And so I tried my friend's technique. I got a big paint pen marker and I was like, all right, I'm gonna try this. You're brilliant. And she's like, all right, give me credit. That's fine, but give me credit. I'm like, of course, right now, here, stamp, credit, where it's due. And so I wanted to carve, I visited Muir Woods in California, and you're in the most gorgeous tall redwoods you've ever seen in your entire life. And then you are like looking at the ground, like looking at the dirt. Oh my gosh, there's such great textures. So I was like looking down like, in a place where everyone is looking up. And so there was this fallen tree, and it has like little leaves that were drawing, like drawing on the tree, and then the texture behind it. So you can see a little bit in this drawing, this print, and it's a 2-layer print. So there's like a reduction. So it's got like a gray and a black, and it's printed with both gray and black here. Here's a close-up of that carving. I just think it's something very funny about spending weeks and weeks carefully carving a mark that you drew like that. Like you draw with such energy, right? And then you can carve it so meticulously. And I think there's something really fascinating about that fast mark, slow mark, and speeding yourself up and slowing yourself down as a part of mark making. Here's another piece where I was thinking about that idea, again, thinking about grasses. I'm really in this period about like looking down. So this is a color reduction print. And again, trying to have that sort of scribbly texture. I like that the feeling of this was almost like writing, like calligraphic writing. I was in an art history class, and someone referred to the impossible to read calligraphy of the emperor as running grass. It's like a sort of Chinese cursive. I think that's apocryphal, but I love the name running grass as a word to describe a kind of grassy looking cursive. And this is why I don't always show my photographs, because every once in a while the photograph is better than the print. I should have just put this one on the wall. Just kidding. But this is the photo that I was looking at when I was carving that piece. And then I fixed the colors on it, and I was like, wow, I love the photo more. Moving on. So still thinking about looking up and looking down. I know some of you joining me today are in the etching class, and etching is amazing. It is such a wonderful, fun process. This is a small etch. Well, it's not small etching. It's like a kind of 24-inch etching of bluebells. So there's a place in Georgia that I would go with my family called The Pocket. And The Pocket is a sort of magical place at the base of Pigeon Mountain that was protected from the Ice Age. Basically, the shape of the mountain range kind of stopped the glaciers. And so in this one little place are flowers that are native that don't grow anywhere else. So these are Virginia bluebells in Georgia. They don't normally grow in Georgia, but here, right here in this one special place, they do. This place is so carpeted with wildflowers that you can't even walk. They've had to install a boardwalk so that you don't crush the flowers as you walk around. Although here in this image, it's much about, it's the flowers are almost getting lost, but it's about that texture and looking down and kind of being intrigued by the sort of woven pattern of it all. So then I start looking up. So this is a place in Kentucky called Red River Gorge. And on the trail of Red River Gorge, it's great rock climbing for those of you who know about it, but I'm not a rock climber. I was just there to hike around. There's this wonderful little slot canyon that goes down into the mountain. And at the bottom of the slot canyon, looking up at the trees, it felt like you were being buried in the earth. It felt like you were underground, looking into the heavens, and you were being held by the earth. Like the window became a portal. It was just like this incredible space, an incredible feeling that this little sliver of landscape evoked, made me feel. That's what inspired this print on your right. So I don't usually show my reference photos because I feel like it kind of spoils the magic, but I wanted you to see that translation. So here on the right hand side, you can see the line of cut. And the line of cut is 60 inches tall. And that's why you can't see very much of the texture. I need to get another photo of this one, but it's about the size of a person. And there's a quality to a piece that you interact with it a little bit differently when it's human sized. You start to relate to it as if it's another person. You kind of like visually see yourself stepping into it. And so this piece is kind of a portal, an entry point into that. And I go back to that carving the air that I was doing in those early prints. And so in this print, I'm carving the air to create that feeling of dappled light through the branches. I call this one Canopy River. It's a canopy and it's a river. But to me, this was a very like, I don't know, it was like a special piece because it really felt kind of emotional. It felt like stepping into that air. And the pandemic hit and I've been visiting my sketchbook. And so I just wanted to briefly talk about, working outside the studio or working in a sketchbook practice. And so I actually just started a series where I've been drawing plein air. I've been taking my sketchbook with me. I've been drawing with ink and watercolor and carrying it around. And every once in a while, I'll be able to turn one of those drawings into a print. But one of the things I really want to try and capture is that feeling of looseness, right? So the sketch has a lot of looseness, a lot of like puddles, right? And then taking that looseness and then carving that looseness. And thinking about like how your drawing practice supports your printmaking and art practice. This is a sketch from the bottom of the Yosemite Valley kind of riverbed with pebbles and textures, and thinking about how you can sketch and how you can draw, and then thinking about that maybe or maybe not. Even if you don't necessarily apply your sketch to a printmaking practice, I think it's still very much time well spent. And it does actually fuel your printing practice. And for me, a lot of this work, I'm kind of dealing with this kind of intermediary of photography. I end up like looking at photography and working through photography and responding to photography. And I thought it was a really nice change to be sitting directly with the landscape, in the landscape, drawing the landscape. And so this is something that I feel like has been a long time coming. And I think that like having a plein air practice is gonna really help that transition towards that state. It's about the landscape in a more kind of physical way. And I'd like to leave you with a small print that I made for my students in the pandemic. This is a prayer for all of you guys. This is the cicada, the animal that can live in hibernation for up to 7 years and then wake up, crawl out into the world screaming. So I consider him a little good luck charm for all of you who have been navigating this tough time. So thank you so much. I think we're at 45 minutes yeah. So I think we have a little bit of time for some questions.
Oh.
Sorry.
We get some really exciting echoes.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, the microphone, help me out. I'm really struggling here.
Echo is off.
Microphone does not work on this computer.
It's working fine without any echoes right now.
We heard no echoes now. The echoes seem to have gone away.
Yeah, and now, okay. All right, can you hear me, Hannah?
I can.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to talk to Hannah through the laptop. I'm so I'm so sorry about this. Okay, well, I'll get this figured out next time. Does anyone have a question?
Yeah, I guess. Thanks for coming. I just have a question. So you're talking about how important working from photographs is in your practice, but like it seemed from the few examples where the photograph was next to the work that there's like a lot of sort of improvisation or like changes that happen between, or not a lot, but maybe that happens. And I guess like I wonder how important being true to the photograph is to you, or like how you, because your work is incredibly detailed, and it seems like, yeah, how much are you like exactly following the photograph, or you like work going from the photograph and sort of learning from it? And yeah, I don't know.
That's a really good question. So when I was younger, it was important to me for some reason. I'm not sure why. I believed that it was important. I don't and I would take these photographs, right? And I'm taking my own reference photos, and I would try to carve them as close as I could. And part of that, I think, was just a sort of personal challenge of it. I wanted to see if I could do it. That's kind of interesting as a student to be like, can I carve like this? And then once you get to the answer is yes, then what? Right? Like once you confirm to yourself that you have that skill, then I feel like at some point, some of the like one-to-one replication is losing a little bit of the hand of the artist. And so in some of the ones where I'm carving the air, the shapes and the plants are often quite representational from the photograph, but the air is its own thing. So I had areas that were photographically carved and areas that I was like giving myself that expressive mark. And so to create an image that didn't look like a photograph, because you're going through this process of making an image and you want to have a little bit of your hand in it. Like you're the artist. Like if you're making such good photographs, like just put the photo in a frame, and that's like my answer to that is I decided I wanted more of the hand of the artist as I worked through time. Although I think that sometimes photography can still be a really important tool. It's not the end all. Thank you.
Hi, I guess I'm wondering, with all of these works, you kind of referenced some greater meaning behind them. And I'm wondering if that meaning was always apparent to you before starting to make the piece, or if sometimes you made something and then reflected on it later and realized that maybe you were subconsciously trying to say something, or you assigned a meaning to it that seemed to fit like kind of the ethos you're going for.
Yes, that is a really good question. So I think that we're echoing again. Are we good? Oh, no, we're good. Okay. So I think that for some pieces, you make a piece and then you look at it and then you discover a meaning you didn't expect. So you like make a piece, like, so say I was like talking about the quilt, right? I wanted to make a quilt out of paper. And I had no idea that making a quilt out of paper would feel so sad. Right? So I made this small quilt out of paper and I'm like, wow, this is like kind of a heavy feeling looking at this. And then I think about like the connotation of losing its function, like we're making this object that's not functional anymore. It's just an image of the thing that's functional. And like thinking about like how kind of pitiful and sad it is to have a quilt that doesn't work as a quilt is absolutely kind of tragic and sad. And then like, so I made this object kind of driven by like an aesthetic interest in the look of the quilted paper. And then I was like, absolutely, this is a piece about grief. And I didn't know that at first, but then I saw that and then I made the bigger one with that knowledge. Right? So the little one I didn't know and I kind of figured it out. And then I made the big one and I was like, this is a piece about grief. And I kind of embraced that understanding I had discovered. And then I look back at other prints and I'm like, you know what? Maybe these were also about grief. Maybe making a house out of grass is a sad thing to do. Am I sad? And the answer was yes, I was. At the time I was dealing with a terrible breakup and I was like, my life sucks. And I was dealing with a lot of grief and I was like channeling it through the work. And I didn't realize it until I did. And then I noticed that happening in other pieces, you know? And so there's an interesting moment. And this is where I think that this is the gift of college, because your friends and your professors will notice this thing. They'll notice it. And then you can now do it on purpose. This thing that you were kind of accidentally doing, you're like, oh shit, now I'm doing it on purpose. So that's kind of like the interesting transmutation. If that answers your question.
Hi, I kind of had a question about earlier you mentioned like with the skirt and with all of the, like specifically like with the circle thing, you mentioned kind of the feeling of exploring like femininity and things like that. And it kind of, at least I saw it kind of showing up in your earlier work in like kind of the focus on like a home and like household objects and things. And I was wondering how kind of is that kind of showing up in your later work, and or like you mentioned kind of someone brought it up to you and you were kind of thinking about it, and I was wondering how you like if you were thinking about it at all going forward or not as much.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Oh, you can stay. It's fine. So to answer your question, to answer your question, I guess I wanted to, I embraced the femininity in the work, and I decided that it was okay, and that all of those feelings I had that were resistance against it was like actually a kind of internalized sexism, right? Like, and it's like, am I being sexist against myself? Like what? Like I thought I was a feminist, and then here I am just being like, this work is too decorative, and I'm like, what's wrong with me? Like, it's good, it's fine, the work is fine. You know, don't be mean to yourself because you want to make work about being a woman and like all of these things that are associated with being a woman, and don't like curtail your work because it might just be read as gendered, you know, and that was okay, and that like things that are associated and I basically came to the conclusion that I thought it was important, and that there was this layer to the work that was gendered, and that I was important, and that I was going to acknowledge it and accept it. And I wasn't going to try to make the work less decorative because I thought that that was feminine, and I had to kind of accept that question, right? My current work is really observational right now. I'm trying to just do plein air observation. And so my sketchbook is just full of like men in baseball caps, because that's what you see when you're sitting in like parks and stuff. And I don't know if that is like the feminist series right now, but as you know, like ideas continue to come back. They reemerge. Like you're gonna come back to these ideas. They bubble up from the tar pits and then they bubble back down again. And they're there. They're all there. All the mammoth skeletons are there waiting for you to find them again later. Sorry. I don't know if my current series is as as specifically thinking about questions of gender as the home series. So I had this series of pieces that were about objects and about the home. And when you talk about objects in the home, you're always talking about like women's places in the home, and like you wanting to, like, what does it mean to have a home? And that question is often one that's very gendered. And I think that ended up being a really important question for that series, and probably one that I'm going to revisit. But something I like to mention for students, especially if you are feeling challenges addressing your own gender in your own work, and that's okay. You know, that is actually a really interesting thing to think about in your work. Go girl.
Jamie, Hannah, we should probably conclude. So thank you very much. It was kind of awkward here, but still worked out pretty well. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. All right, well, I guess I'll let you guys go. Thank you so much. It was a real treat. And thank you, Heidi.
Thanks so much for bearing with us and our technical issues. Can you hear us?
I can.
Oh, here, I need to make this louder. Okay, here we go. Hi.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice.
Hannah, do you know Teresa Cole?
I do know Teresa Cole. I love her work.
Because that whole thing you were talking about, like her whole thing for years has been that the decorative is really about culture. And so it shouldn't be like a slur.
I know. And it was just like this moment, I'm like, it's kind of decorative. And Andrew was like, what's wrong with decorative? And I was like, oh my God, nothing is wrong with decorative. What's wrong with me?
Yeah. The other thing is I don't remember. I mean, I remember meeting you and everything, but I don't remember what we talked about. But so your plein air stuff. So I don't know if you know this, but for years I've been taking students to Australia and New Zealand, and we draw in national parks. So I've got like stacks of these books, and it's been really interesting to do with the students, in part because some of them aren't so comfortable in nature, and so the idea of like getting them out, for some of them it's very new to them. You know,
Oh yeah.
there might be their hike or things like that. And then also to like sit down and draw, and the discipline that goes into that, the time that goes into that kind of thing. It takes a while to establish, but then it's kind of powerful. It works pretty well. Yeah.
No, it's been a really good practice. It's just a bit challenging because it doesn't feel finished.
Yeah, that's fine.
You know, like a bunch of